profiler, so. Okay, administration of the specs. So section 36.3, so Blair was talking about this earlier. Section 36 is a general section for all pavements. There's a lot of information in there. 36.3 is the subsection that is general for smoothness. So 36.3 is essentially laid out in this fashion like many of our specs. There's a general section, materials, construction, and payment. So under general, we have submittals, definitions, summary. So all those sections still exist, but we added some sections. This next slide shows the sections that we added. So this whole 36.3 is getting replaced in the NSSP, so you don't have to insert all the different paragraphs. You'll have the whole section. So the main things that changed are the submittal requirements. So we have a smoothness quality control plan that's required. We also have a smoothness payment adjustment request. So the purpose for the smoothness quality control plan is when we start analyzing a lot of profiles and comparing one to another at different times, it's been my experience that every time I try to compare one profile with another, the DMIs don't measure. They don't align with each other. You can look at them in the software, they just don't line up. So the main purpose for this quality control plan is to do what we can to make sure every profile lines up with the previous profiles. So this basically is this quality control plan is going to have a layout sheet that defines what the beginning station is, and if the stationing for that DMI increases or decreases. So anybody that comes out to the project that's going to be running an inertial profiler, they'll take this quality control plan and use that same station. So that station is also has to have a nail on the ground or some semi-permanent reference point that's maintained throughout the life of the project so that everybody can start from that same location. So, and we have requirements for the PPF files. So these are the raw data profiles that come out of the inertial profiler. The inertial profilers can give you a lot of different formats. This is the standard format. It's just raw data. All this file is just elevations. There's no IRI data in it. It's just PPF. It's just elevations. We feed these into ProVal to come out with the IRI values. Okay, and then the smoothness payment adjustment request. So this is new. This is where the contractor's got to do a lot of things to get these profiles to line up. We're making sure he goes through all those steps before he gives us payment adjustment request. If these profiles don't line up with each other, he's non-compliant. He'll get a withhold until he comes into compliance. So part of this adjustment request is a ProVal project file and a payment adjustment spreadsheet. For every line, you're going to have these two files. These go together. This ProVal project file is essentially all the PPFs into one file, all zipped up. You can double-click on that PVP file, and you'll see all the profiles, and they should all line up with each other. So the contractor has to go through that step if he wants to get his adjustment. If he doesn't do that, he's going to be non-compliant. There'll be a large withhold until he comes into compliance. So, okay, so the quality control plan layout. So the semi-permanent reference points. So I talked about this layout plan earlier. These semi-permanent reference points are really important. So we're going to establish a semi-permanent reference point at the beginning and the ending of the project. And it's based on the plans. So if we have a project that's 10 miles long and they're doing this in two different stages, the first year 5 miles, the second year the second 5 miles, we want the contractor to run through the existing profile from beginning to end. So he'll have a beginning station for that first semi-permanent reference point, and he'll have an ending station for that last semi-permanent reference point. If there's any bridges in between, he'll have semi-permanent reference points called out on his layout plan. A person could, if they had to, like in year 2, they could start in the second 5 mile, and they don't have to run the whole profile again when they're doing their pave or their final profiles. So we'll cover that in a little more detail. Okay, there's a requirement for locating and how these semi-permanent reference points are labeled in the field. So we have a standard naming convention that they should be following in the spec. If you walk up to and you see a semi-permanent reference point on the shoulder, you should be able to look at it and say that's at this station, and the station's increasing or decreasing. You can basically start your inertial profiler at that point and initialize your profile using that station. So KMZ files, these are also required to be submitted in this part of this quality control plan. A KMZ file is basically just a file that when you click on it, you can go to Google Earth and you'll see the coordinate information. We want them to take color photographs of these semi-permanent reference points that they've placed in the field. So anybody that pulls out to the job site, they have a better chance of making sure they find that semi-permanent reference point. And also GPS coordinates. So with this KMZ file, you can also get GPS coordinates out of that. Okay, so the pavement profiles needed are a function of the type of pavement we're building. If we're building HMA pavement or asphalt pavement, we have 4 profiles we have to get. If we're building a new concrete pavement, we don't really care about the existing or baseline. We just want the pave and the final. And if we're grinding existing concrete, the specs for grind existing, they essentially say you have to get a 40% improvement over the MRI that's out there. So obviously we need to know the existing and we need to know the final. But we're going to ask for the baseline file because we know they're going to go run that baseline. That baseline is going to be run after they do any slab replacements or anything. This doesn't come into the payment equation. It's just information that we want because if we don't require them to give it to us, they're not going to give it to us. We know they're going to run it. So.
Peter, I have a question on that one. We have a project where we have a claim. So we're trying to see the percentage improvement after they pave and before they do the final corrective grinding, but because they are not required to submit, they did not submit. So would it be important to include it, or so they submit? So.
Well, I mean, you have an asphalt project right now where
Right.
there's a claim and they're.
Yeah, it happened 2 years ago. So we don't have the profile after they pave, which is not, they are not required to submit it.
No, they are required in the old specs to submit that profile.
No, I think that's spec they were not required. It was 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is now to analyze the claim, headquarters, they wanted to see the percent improvement after they pay, right? We have the profile after they did the corrective grinding, which they complied. But the amount of effort, the grinding they did to meet the spec. So since we don't have the profile after they finish paving, we couldn't really compare the percent improvement after they finish the paving. So, so I was just wondering, I was hoping this new spec would include the contractor would require to submit the pavement profile after they finish the paving, yeah.
Okay, so with this new spec, the issue that you had on the other project, those files were, I believe, required to be submitted, but they were supposed to be uploaded to a website. The difference between the old spec and this new spec is that they have to give us notice when they're going to go out and run these profiles. We're supposed to go out and witness them. Ideally, they'll give us a thumb drive with these PPF files on it out of the truck. Because the spec says within 12 hours of the same day, give us these files. We don't want them taking off and then forgetting to give us the files or modifying the files. We have a time frame on how soon they have to submit these. They're supposed to give these directly to the engineer, these pavement profiles. So I don't know if that answered your question or.
Yeah, I think it would help because what happened in the past, we're not really, the contractors were not submitting the files on time. That was the other issue also. Yep. And then not having the same reference points was a second issue.
Yeah.
So I think that would help.
A lot of what I think, a lot of the issues we had in the past are this is something that's fairly new. These inertial profiling specs, even 2 or 3 years ago, was new to people. They didn't really understand what was required. Contractors have a tendency to, if there's something if they're going to give you information, the only reason they're going to give it to you is if it benefits them, right? If they have information that's not going to benefit them, they're not going to give it to you. They have to give it to us. That's part of the spec.
Right. So. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, so you can call Wahid Maroof. He has access to all those electronic files that were supposed to be uploaded. Chances are they probably didn't upload the files, but. Okay, so again, every one of these profiles have to be submitted immediately after running them. So, in the old specs, we had existing, and then we used to call this inter. This was stood for intermediate. Now we call it baseline, and we'll cover that shortly here. And I think the last file that we ran was called correct. Now we're calling it final. It's the final file. It's the one that meets spec. So, okay, leave-out changes. So section 36301D3B discusses leave-outs. So every one of these items is now covered as a leave-out. Areas within 15 feet of manholes, weighing motion stations. Essentially anything that's out in the traveled way that, you know, is essentially going to cause a bump that they were out of their control. There's this last item here, gutter pans. That's read and struck through because that is in some of the NSSPs right now, and we're trying to get that taken out of that because what that says is if we have a shoulder that's 15 feet or less, we don't have any MRI requirements on it, right? That doesn't make sense. I think this was intended to maybe be a gutter pan that runs across the traveled way like you'd see at intersections. So this is getting taken out. You know, where industry wants to, you know, if they have a shoulder that's 8 foot or 10 foot or greater, they want to, if it's less than 8 feet, they want to be able to waive the whole shoulder. I think it, you know, it should be something less, but this is something that we have to work with industry and come up with an agreement. So, I mean, if we can contractors can pave the through lane. They're supposed to pave the through lane first, and then if there's a gutter pan that they're having to tie into with a conform grind, you know, they can come back and make a second pass. And there's limitations on how, you know, what's economically feasible and what's realistic. So we have to come to an agreement on what that is. It'll probably say within X feet of gutter pans. So areas within 25 feet each side of intersections. So before we didn't have any language about intersections. So there's a lot of intersections where we have stop signs or stop lights, and we couldn't measure the MRI when you had to come up to a stop sign, right? So that's going to cover this. If this needs to get changed later because there's contractors that are interpreting driveways as an intersection or some other feature, you know, we'll have to address that. Shoulders, we never did run inertial profilers on shoulders. Miscellaneous areas, that really hasn't changed. Okay, item 6 here, areas within 15 feet of the beginning of an approach slab of a structure. That was in our spec already. And it used to say even 15 feet beyond, but now it says 40 feet. So we changed the 40 feet off the trailing end of a bridge because you're still getting roughness measurements as you're coming off a bridge from bumps you might have hit on the bridge or at the joint. You can still be bouncing as you're, so most of that IRI, most of that roughness that you felt coming off a bridge is basically kind of had a tendency to go away after 40 feet, so. Okay, so now I'll go over overview of the construction process. So I'll be going through every one of these. Review the QC plan, witnessing the quality control, witnessing the inertial profiles, reviewing the payment request, and then calculating an adjustment. And at the end, you know, basically we want to get all this data submitted. So now I put these green cones up there for a reason, because I recently went through a project and I saw green cones on the shoulder. And they were right where the leave-outs were. I'm thinking, wow, that's a great idea, right? Because these cones are what the contractor uses. He can put a reflective sleeve on the cone, and as the inertial profiler runs by it, it'll automatically sense it. If he hits a button within a couple seconds or something, that's how the inertial profiles work. Well, if you put a bunch of orange cones out there, the contractor's probably going to pick them up. If he sees a green one, you know, or a different color, you know, the guy that's picking the cones up is not going to accidentally pick up that semi-permanent reference point. So, saw that on Highway 50 between Sunrise and Eldorado Hills. Okay, the quality control plan. The quality control plan ensures all existing profiles line up with the contractor's initial existing profile. So on most of our projects are asphalt. We don't have that many concrete files. That would be the pave profile if we were talking about our new concrete lane, because we have the pave in the final only. So we want to make sure that every profile lines up with the first profile that we run. So this quality control plan, we talked about that previous. I'm going to say it again. These semi-permanent reference points, they got to be locked in, and people got to use them. If they don't use them, this is not going to work. We're going to have major problems with making these payment adjustments. Okay, so anybody that comes out to that job with a profiler, they're going to use the same station and the same direction of increase. organization certs, contact information, responsibilities, that layout plan sheet, that's the plan sheet that's going to have all that information. Anybody that's going to run the inertia profiler will have. They'll basically make sure they use the correct plan. So, okay, the contractor's profile runs. So now we're witness. So when the contractor goes out and runs his existing profile, the specs require him to basically let us know ahead of time so that we can witness. Time frame is, I think it's 2 days ahead of time. I don't have that up there, but there's a spec that basically says they're supposed to notify us when we have a chance to go out there and witness. They're also supposed to run a video. So then they're going to give us the electronic copy of that drive. So they're going to give us, a thumb drive that hopefully has a video on it and all the PPF files on it. So then also we're doing that for the baseline. So why do we care about these videos on these two profiles but not these other ones? Well, we can go run these other ones again later. They're always going to be there. These are going to get covered up with pavement or ground away inward. So also, with our percent improvement specs, when the contractor goes and measures this existing profile, it's to his benefit. I'm not saying a contractor would do this, but if there's a pothole that's not in the wheel track, if you can drive through that pothole that's outside of that wheel track, that existing MRI is going to go up, and he has a chance of increasing his incentive. So the intent is so that we have a good record of where that profile was run, and what the conditions were. So our specs also we don't need an actual video. So most of these profilers they're selling now have the capability of taking a picture every X many feet, and we're saying every 52.8 feet. So that's basically one reflector. Every time you're driving down the road, reflectors are 48 feet apart. You'll see a picture every reflector, right? So we don't need that many. We don't need huge files. We just want a photographic record. Okay, so we'll get that video or those pictures every 52.8 feet for the existing and the baseline. And all these profiles got to be submitted directly to the engineer within 12 hours. We're going to use these later in the payment process. Okay, so the payment adjustment spreadsheet. The specs require the payment adjustment spreadsheet. And this is basically requires the MRI data to be pulled directly out of ProVal. So in ProVal, when you run the MRI, you can run there's a lot of different reports ProVal will run. The one that we're going to be going into is called the Ride Quality Fixed Interval MRI Report. I named it that. I didn't name it that. That's what a lot of people call it, but it's the buttons that you're clicking in succession to get to that actual report. So it'll give you a table of all the MRI values, the beginning station, the end station, the segment length, and MRI value. And all this tabular data is going to get exported out of ProVal into this spreadsheet. And the rule is it's got to be a direct export from ProVal. There's nothing to stop a contractor from taking those values and then changing them on the spreadsheet other than you're going to check them. You're going to be doing the same thing to make sure that they didn't change any values. The spreadsheet takes care of that. Okay, so then we're going to obtain the worksheet. This is now online here. We have a worksheet for HMA, and I just went through this with the representative from CalAPA last week, and we double-checked it and triple-checked it. We feel it's working exactly the way it should work. So not to say that there won't be a bug here or there that we might have to fix, but we're confident this thing's working now. We have a sheet for the concrete and the grind existing concrete under development. So those are very easy sheets. So when I walk through these worksheets for HMA, the most complicated one, if you can do that, you can basically take the next step for concrete or grind existing concrete. They're very simple. Okay, so contractor payment request submittal. It's two files. There's an Excel file and a ProVal project file, a PVP file. These go together. Information from here goes into there. You're going to get that ProVal file, and you're going to pull that same information in to make sure they didn't change any values. Okay, and then, so this slide here is meant to basically explain the fact that when you open up these specs, you'll see a lot of tables And it's a bit overwhelming when you dig through these smoothness specs. It's very overwhelming when you look at it and you try to digest all the rules and everything. Well, it's all built into the spreadsheet. So you import these profiles in, and it calculates everything per the spec, and it does all the checks for you. And we'll walk through what that does. So one of the functions, let me cover the yellow cells here. So, like any black box, you don't really need to know what's inside that black box. We have input that goes in and output that comes out of it. We can we can dial some knobs in to change it a little bit. So we have to basically tell the spreadsheet, what the pavement type is. Is it HMA? Is it open graded friction course on existing? Is it open graded friction course on new? We have to tell it the opportunities for improvement for that lane. We have to tell it the layer thickness. We have to tell it if there's any pre-paving corrections. We have to tell it, did the contractor address all the ALRs? There's no automatic function for this. You're going to have to go into ProVal and look at a screen and say, yeah, I agree with you, contractor. You resolved all the ALRs. These are basically just zeros that we're going to put into a column, 0 ALRs. And then we have this other checkbox here. It's called Pave or Final, and we'll cover that a little bit later. But we're going to use the Pave file for the payment adjustment. And if it is in a must-correct zone, a mandatory correction, the contractor has to go out there and correct it, and those values will show up on the final profile. So if you want to use that final profile as the payment adjustment, you check that box. So when you check it, it's going to go find that final MRI value, and it's going to make sure that we don't pay for grinding into correction. If the contractor had a deduction and you check that box and they ground into correction, the contractor is not going to get an incentive. He'll just get 0 adjustment. So engineer is going to verify the contractor's data came directly from ProVal. The spreadsheet does that. Contractor's profiles are aligned. When the contractor brings all these profiles, if they're not aligned with each other, there's some checks in there where there's a bunch of things that go red. And he's going to know right away, and he shouldn't be submitting that to us if it shows that there's misalignment data. And there's a section where we can import our verification profiles to compare them to the contractors. Are they within? We have to do 1 profile per 10 of the contractors. That's our minimum requirement. You should do more. You should do more if you can. We're just going to compare 1 profile to the contractor's profile, ours to theirs, and if it's within 10% overall MRI, then it verifies. And obviously it calculates the payment adjustment. Okay, now this is the spreadsheet. All these yellow cells are input, so these are all generic information up here. And down below here's where the dollar amount is calculated, when everything's in compliance. If something's non-compliant on this lane, it's going to show non-compliant. He's not going to get an adjustment. So this is a different view of that same spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet's essentially a bunch of worksheets. So we have the front payment adjustment worksheet is what we're looking at right now. We're basically exporting the data from ProVal into each one of these worksheets in the back, and it all gets brought forward. These green tab worksheets are for the contractor, and the orange tabs are where we import that same data to make sure the contractor didn't change anything. So we have to basically tell the spreadsheet, what's the layer thickness, what are the total opportunities for improvement. In the HMA type, that text is kind of small, but there's a drop-down list for some selections there. These 3 cells here, they define what spec we're going to end up using. Okay, if I say there's 1 opportunity for improvement, this 1 gets carried down all these yellow cells here in this column. Each one of these rows is a different segment. So I might have a segment where I have to increase the opportunities from 1 to 2. I can do it at the segment level by putting, just going to that segment and putting a 2 in there. Okay, so this yellow cell over here, this column here is, the contractor's got to put zeros in there to indicate that there's no ALRs in each one of these segments. Every row is a 10th mile segment. If he doesn't put a 0 in there, or he puts something else in there, this text is going to get struck through and he's going to get a non-compliant up here. And we have some other input over here for full width segment corrections and partial width segment corrections. You'll check those boxes if you have full width or partial width, and we'll cover that. This looks overwhelming, maybe, to some people. It does, yeah. You're importing a table into 4 worksheets, and you're selecting a couple yellow boxes. There's a lot of information. This is going to be your backup for your payment adjustment, that dollar amount. And all the backup information you need is going to show up on that sheet. Okay, on that last worksheet, this is the one that's a little bit different. We're going to basically do some checks. The first check we're going to do is make sure that the contractor didn't change any of his data. So there's 4 columns of data. It's shown off to the left here. If there's any differences in their data versus our data, we're going to see what the differences are. These will go red with some values in them. If they all match, it'll be all green here. That means the contractor didn't change any of their data. On the final worksheet, you'll have this same table on every one of these on the existing baseline and paved. So that's the check to make sure they didn't change their data. The next check is, okay, the contractor gave us a ProVal project file that had all those 4 PPF files in there. We want to make sure that those 4 PPF files are the same files that he gave us that day in the field, or daily in the field. So we can import from ProVal an overall report and get all the MRI values that are in that ProVal project file. Then we can look at the actual values from those individual files. We can kind of compare to make sure that the MRIs are a little bit different. They might be a little bit different because the contractor might have had a jog. He might have accidentally left a leave out. So we're going to be checking the overall to individual PPFs. Oops. Then the last one is where we bring in our verification value. So here we ran a final profile, and we had a 53 and they had a 50. So, we're a 5% difference from them. It's less than 10, so it's verified. So you don't have to check every one of these, but you should. As a practice, I think I would do the final one on every project for sure. Okay, then once we have everything agreed to on the worksheet, we calculate the adjustment, and make it a payment adjustment. So the resident engineers has their supplemental fund allotment for this incentive adjustment. You can write a change order ahead of time and encumber those funds so that monthly you can turn the X-work bill in to make that payment adjustment. Similar to how the asphalt index adjustments are done, and some people used to do QC/QA that way. Okay, so in the end, once you make these payment adjustments, we're requiring the resident engineer, to submit these spreadsheets to headquarters, to these websites. If it's asphalt, submit it to that asphalt.smoothest at dot.ca.gov. If it's concrete, concrete.smoothest. So what we're going to do is take all this information and we're going to analyze it, and then we can make recommended changes, or maintenance division of pavements can look at improving their specs. So this right here is a common way to look at some of these MRI values that we have. We have an existing surface that we're overlaying. Here's MRI values from 0 up to 140. And here's a final surface. So, this was the Highway 50 project that went, one of the lanes that went from Sunrise Boulevard up to El Dorado Hills. Most of their pavement that they were milling and filling was in the 60s to 80s. Some of it was close to 100. They paved all that back, and they had one in that lane that was 58. That's smooth. Most of their paving was in the 30s and 40s. So, this project right here, if it was on an disincentive project, they would have earned the incentive on every fixed increment. I can look at a project that was right next to that, where it was the same structural section, different contractor. Existing MRIs were the same, and they paved 110s, 120s. So contractors, when they pay attention, they'll obviously do better paving. When they're trying, they can pave smoother. When they're not trying, they don't need to pave so smooth. And in the past, And a lot of our projects just had a straight edge spec on it. It was kind of like, they know the RE's not going to get out on his hands and knees and push a straight edge through the whole project. We're measuring every project now for smoothness, so they have to pave smooth. I mean, there's no other way around it now, so.
Oh, just quick question on that.
Yep.
How are you differentiating between the existing and final?
Oh, these are so this, I basically took a table, and I had all the existing MRI values beforehand. I got all the profiles lined up. The profiles were lined up, right? So if I looked at this dot right here, that's 1/10 mile segment. I would have had an existing MRI value of, say that's 58 right there, right?
Uh-huh.
I know that.
Okay.
I have an MRI report, right?
Okay. So
They milled it out, they paved it back, and they ran it. They ran their MRI, their inertia profiler over that, and figured out the MRI. Now that this MRI was 27.
Okay. I guess I see it.
Yeah,
I do see it.
yeah. Okay. So, and there's a line here. I mean, you could there's a function in Excel to come up with an average line based on all that data, but.
So some of the formulas that industry brought forth were based on, some data that they thought they had. We didn't necessarily have good data on the Caltrans side to refute it. So when they said that when they came up with the achievable smoothness limits, which was 0.3 times MRI existing plus
35,
excuse me, for percent improvement, we didn't have a lot of data to fight back and say, okay, that's a good number, not a good number, that's a good formula, not a good formula. So over the coming year, we're going to study the data a little bit. We're going to try to see, how, if the existing pavement is, 150, how smooth can you get it, right? So, in a mill and fill operation. So, they're saying, that mill and fill is not going to get that, smooth.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking to do, basically, is gather the data that we have from the existing jobs, go back, look at it. We're going to form a group with industry and Caltrans and look at some of the data. So that's basically what we're wanting this from your slide.
Yeah, so the other part of these mill and fill projects, right? This was a project where they were just milling out old open graded that had a lot of longitudinal joints were falling apart. The lanes were in decent shape. The MRI was 60s to 100. It wasn't bad, right? 60s to 90s. That was the definition of a good pavement's 95. Anything less than MRI of 95 is good. Over that's fair. But I mean, this pavement could have had a lot of potholes in it, right? And our MRIs would have been way over here. When they milled that out, that mill doesn't care if there was a pothole there, right? He's going to mill it out. They probably could have just paved back to those same MRI values. So. He has a question. We're videotaping this, so we'd like to make sure everybody can hear it. Hey, Deborah, we're doing questions. Yeah, okay.
So you mentioned the bidding package for will include existing MI.
Yeah.
So then the contractor will run their existing and and then it varies more than 10%. Which one do you use to compare for incentive?
Okay, we're always going to use the contractor's existing profile, always. The one that was from pre-bid is just to check if there's a differing site condition or something changed. We're not saying if it's 10% different that we're going to make any adjustment to we're not right to change it. We're just saying let us know, so we'll look at it, right? I mean, there's no magic equation that you can just come up.
Sometimes there's a lot of time between when we do ours and when the job actually gets bid.
Yeah.
It might affect it if the roadway's got a high ADT.
And then the other part is Blair was talking about comparing data before and after and all that. I mean, we were getting all this data in from all these projects, not all of them, but a lot of data. But nothing was aligned, trying to make heads or tails of all that data wasn't very feasible. Now we're requiring the contractor to give us all this profile data aligned, right? Now we can,
So if you look at the section 36 specs, they talk about trying to resolve differences with Caltrans and the contractor and try to work to resolve these differences. But there also is a section about, third-party dispute and going out and employing a third-party dispute and then, whichever one is closer to utilizing the one that's there. But, you know, it's in our best interest to try to work these things out, right? And if you're right, if it's been a long time since we've gone out and run the profile, and it's not that close, you know, not that far off, I mean, you're probably better off, you know, accepting the contractor's data and moving forward with the project. You know, the specs are gonna pay them a little bit more of incentive, like Pete was saying, if it's a percent improvement job, if the payment got a little bit rougher. There are target zones in these. We've got wider target zones. We don't have the hard line 60. I don't think you're going to get into all these fights over, you know, unachievable pavement. And you'll see that as we get into some of the pavement smoothness values in the afternoon.
Yeah, this is not typical. This is an exceptional paving job. Most jobs you'll see are up here.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of made a point of this. I drive over this every day.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, this job rides really well. So
So we're getting close to our break, and we'll power through a couple more of these slides here.
okay, now it's not advancing. Space bar or arrow key. Okay, we'll use a space bar from now on. So this slide shows a lot of web links. So the top web link is to the division of the Office of Pavements web page. It's got a lot of information in there that designers have access to. Construction, we have a web page now. It's the DOT. It's basically HQ construct/smoothness. We're making all of ours external. We have nothing to hide. So you click on that, it's going to redirect you to another link. It's called construction.smoothness because it's ADA approved. On that, you'll find the pavement adjustment worksheet for HMA. Soon you'll find the concrete and the grind existing concrete. These smoothness adjustment guidelines, we're putting these out, and these are going to probably be out within the week. We're just going through some final edits on it. There's a video online right now for how to fill this payment adjustment worksheet out. You know, it's basically going through all the steps a contractor will go through. So that's online. There's other links in there. Okay, for more information, we'll have this construction administration guideline. There's